Welcome one and all to another Cyberpunk 2077 news update. In my quest to bring you all the latest and greatest in what is now my most anticipated game, I've been perusing the internet for any new information, and there's some bits and pieces out there worth mentioning. So obviously one of the things that people are most curious about is ways you'll be able to traverse the city. We already know that cars and motorcycles will be prominently featured in the game and that players will be able to free roam the world with these vehicles. But what makes the cyberpunk genre so distinct in that regard is of course flying cars, or aerodynes as they're known in this particular universe. Everyone is wondering, will players be able to have full control over flying cars and vehicles and traverse the city that way? Well, as luck would have it, Projekt has actually provided a response to a few outlets who posed the question, starting with gaming news website Metro, when they asked, quote, "Was it implied you'd be able to drive flying cars as well?" unquote. Max Pierce from Projekt responded as follows: "You won't be able to control flying cars, but they will be used for missions for crucial things. But the main way to get through will be on foot, cars, and bikes." Adding to that was lead cinematic animator Maciej Pietras when talking to website Rock Paper Shotgun. When asked the same question, his response was quite similar, stating, quote, "Current means of transportation that I can tell you about, that we are sure of, and that we know we can share with you. Obviously, you can walk on foot, you can drive a car, and you can drive a motorcycle. When it comes to AVs, aerial vehicles, yes, there will be moments when you will be able to fly AVs, but you're not going to be able to control it, because if you refer to the source material, AVs are like the most expensive things in the Cyberpunk 2020 world." So what I'm getting from these two responses is that while aerodynes will be featured in the game, in fact one of the first shots of the Cyberpunk 2077 trailer shows an aerodyne zooming past, it's not one of those things you'll be able to hop on and freely traverse the city, Grand Theft Auto style. It seems as though they'll serve very specific gameplay purposes in very specific circumstances. Pierce talked about how they'll be used for crucial things in certain missions, so I can imagine certain on-rail sequences involving using aerodynes as transportation, or maybe even engaging in mid-flight firefights and other cool shit like that. I can also imagine aerodynes being potentially used as part of some kind of fast travel mechanic. Witcher 3 had some kind of fast travel mechanic, so I don't see why Cyberpunk 2077 wouldn't have one either. But instead of having to discover and use signposts to do so, perhaps players will be able to use things like public transportation, whether it's the metro, taxis, or aerodynes. Regardless of how they're implemented, expect flying cars to be more on rails or instanced than the more free-roam grounded vehicles like cars and motorcycles. You know, I'm personally not too bothered by this based on the demo that I saw in the world we were presented. It didn't feel like giving players complete free reign and full control over flying cars would go very well. As cool as it would be to be able to freely drive an aerodyne, I feel like game design and world design wise, keeping them a little more confined is for the better and just less chaotic. This also paves the way for the developers to be able to do some very cool and specific things with aerodynes. You know what, if it serves the world, narrative, and gameplay scenarios, I don't mind the developers reeling things in a little bit and keeping things focused. Sometimes less might be more. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see how they implement aerodynes. I hope there's enough of it in Cyberpunk 2077 to give us our fill of flying cars, as they are such an iconic aspect of Cyberpunk. But I'm alright with players not being able to completely freely control them if it means overall better design across the board. So that's it for flying vehicles. Next up, I'd like to present information that was kindly tweeted to me by user at Umbrella Person. In the tweet, they linked me to what I believe to be a Polish interview with a Projekt developer. I don't speak Polish, but fortunately the Twitter user was kind enough to give me the basic bullet points of the new and relevant information that was presented. The first bullet point lists that according to the interviewee, you can kill civilians in Cyberpunk 2077. I did notice in the demo I saw that there wasn't any restrictions regarding when players can sheath or draw their weapons. There were multiple occasions in the private presentation in which the player drew their gun in the middle of the streets, and I take it that if you shoot at a pedestrian, they would be killed. As for what the consequences of that are, if there's some kind of wanted level system akin to Grand Theft Auto or some kind of crime system, that's something that hasn't been disclosed yet. But I'd assume that the game will find ways to mitigate players' temptation to just go on a murder spree, namely in the form of cops and corporate police, who I'm sure will pull all stops to take you down, and will likely do so with ease, particularly during early levels. Moving on, the next bullet point highlighted that there would be many genres of music in Cyberpunk 2077. From what I saw, I noticed very upbeat tactical music combined with cyberpunk-style synth, as well as rock and roll music from Johnny Silverhand playing in the radio of the main character's apartment. I imagine that there will be plenty of other music from plenty of other genres to listen to on the radio inside buildings and clubs, and I'm assuming that gameplay background music will feature all sorts of tones, moods, and styles as well. From there, the next bullet point lists that NPCs in Cyberpunk 2077 will act according to the time of day, meaning that they will have schedules. This was also something that was alluded in Angry Joe's interview with Mike Pondsmith and CD Projekt Red, where they talked about how daytime Night City is very different from nighttime Night City. Certain types of people and events will be prominent during the day, and other types will be prominent during the night. Last but not least, the final bullet point talks about how prostitution will somehow be featured in the game one way or another. The world and genre of Cyberpunk being what it is, this honestly only seems par for the course. Now, I wouldn't go as far as expecting fully interactive sex minigames or anything crazy like that, but we have been told that players would not only be able to engage in long-term relationships with certain characters, but also engage in one-night stands if they so desire. From what little I gleaned from the demo, the sex was more implied than anything, as we saw V wake up in her apartment with a naked man beside her. But at the same time, looking back at games like Witcher 3, which does feature some explicit cutscenes, I imagine that we can expect something within that vein from Cyberpunk 2077 as well. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all the new information I have to share about this game, so with that, I would like to end this news update. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoy my content and would like to support this channel directly, consider donating on Patreon. And to be further updated on all things Cyberpunk 2077, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.